Now, your eyesight is something that you can quite easily take for granted. It's not until we hear stories or personal experience sight loss that we can understand its life-changing implications. Ahead of World Sight Day, Fighting Blindness is hosting a special conference, and I'm joined in studio by some of the speakers. Professor David Keegan, consultant ophthalmologist at the Mater University Hospital and a member of the Retina 2018 Organising Committee. Sculptor Victoria Clare, and Shane Byrne, who is Fighting Blindness Ambassador. And you, of course, know him for his rugby prowess, but this is another side of Shane. Good morning and welcome to you all.
Morning.
Now, Shane, the reason you are here is an extraordinary story that I was reading about last night, and I must say it took my breath away. It's about your granddad.
Yeah, incredible man. Dr. James Hanlon was his name, and he was a top surgeon in Dublin at the time, which is in the 50s.
He was the ENT man.
Yeah. Eye, ears, nose and throat and all that. And he was taking someone's tonsils out, and during the operation, the patient coughed, and a little bit of spittle went in his eye, an infection set in, and it got pretty serious pretty quick, and it started to spread to his other eye, and antibiotics weren't working. And so there was a new drug on the scene called streptomycin, and he went over to London to get it. But unfortunately, it was the correct drug, but it was brand new on the scene, and they accidentally gave him a 30 times overdose.
30 times?
Yeah.
The appropriate dose?
They gave it to him like the drug that they used to use, like cortisone, whatever, and it had catastrophic effects. He lost his eyesight because it didn't have the effect it needed, but as a side effect, he lost his hearing. So in the space of about 9 months, he was gone from being a top surgeon to being blind and deaf. So absolutely horrendous, as you can imagine, for the family.
And I can imagine coming home to his children, an utterly different man being helped into the house.
Yeah.
And they watched the man they had seen depart for London, admittedly with a problem at the time, but coming back utterly changed.
Absolutely. And as you just said, a broken man. He found it very hard to deal with. A young family, 4 kids, my mother being one of them, the second youngest. And
does she recall that episode, how shattering that was?
My Auntie Veronica, who was the eldest at the time, she remembers it, as in remembers the day that he left to go to London, and he came back, in the state that he was in. And my mother, who was very young at the time, she doesn't remember him any other way. It was just, this was the way. Yeah. So anyway, he got on and obviously went into depression and everything like that, but he had huge faith, went to Lourdes, and whatever experience he had out there, he came back a changed man. This is after a year or so, and he just proceeded to grab life by the scruff. He decided to become a practicing physio, and he couldn't get permission in Trinity College to do it because
they said it couldn't be done. You have no hearing. You are not sighted. Sorry.
Yeah, the only way he could communicate is through tactile sign language, which is spelling out every word on the hand, on the palm of the hand. So he had a secretary who had to go everywhere with him, and he would literally just leave his hand open and she would spell out every word during the lecture, which didn't happen in Trinity. He had to go over to London. He had got permission from the then brand new Queen, who is still the Queen, to go over and study in London. And she would translate everything to Braille. Then at night that he could study it, and they realised not suddenly that he was well ahead of it. Been a top surgeon. After 9 months, he got an honorary degree, and we're checking it out. We find it hard to check it, but we do believe that he was the first ever in the world fully practicing physiotherapist, qualified, and he created a practice, got going to it. As you may know, there was a polio epidemic in Dublin in particular at the time, and he was very, very central to that in the Central Remedial Clinic. That's where he worked out of, and just an amazing fact that he just continued on with life as if
reading about
nothing
him,
had happened.
It appears that when he went into private practice as well, that his wife, who would be your grandmother, was so good at the tactile signing that patients didn't even know when they were talking to him, because he wore dark glasses to obscure the eyes that were not functioning.
Yeah.
And she was tapping away quietly on his hand so quickly that he did it in real time. There was no hesitation.
No, there was a patient. And one of the things is, when you're wearing earphones, your noise volume of your voice might go up or down, and you might be shouting at people and you don't think you are.
Famous Julia Roberts scene in Pretty Woman.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he famously could keep his voice exactly appropriate to the situation. Now, Lord knows how he did it. And a patient was asked, do you find anything unusual about your doctor? And this was a polio patient, and he said, well, it was just a bit unusual that he wears dark glasses during the day. And that was it, because everything was happening live, and as the patient was talking, he was able to answer back. But listen, talk about he was a champion, he was an athlete, like he was a champion golfer, a diver, and he continued to dive. He dove off the 40-foot, blind and deaf, which, fair play. Eddie Heron, who was the Irish champion diver, the Olympic diver, he used to dive with him. The two of them, you imagine going, even climbing up that with those two senses missing, and the two of them used to dive off the platform, and he'd touch him just before the water so that he'd know to put the hands out. Absolutely outrageous. Listen, he continued to play a little bit of golf. My granny, would you tell him, listen, you're 100 yards out, you've a pitching wedge in your hand, the ball is, you've placed it, and away you go. An absolutely amazing man.
Extraordinary man.
The things that he just continued to do.
Now, you mentioned his faith. He actually died in Lourdes.
Yeah, he went out, and he said it to everybody that he's going out there now, and all my affairs are settled. And he went out and he died in Lourdes, and he's buried in Lourdes. His death was announced by the then Pope on papal radio, and he had a huge effect. Like he was over in America raising money. He was a very, very well known. Helen Keller obviously was who had the same affliction, but she was born that way. And there's a famous interaction between the two of them where he wrote a letter to her saying that, look, I can't imagine how it was, because she was born blind and deaf. And she writes back and goes, no, what you had was far worse, because you know what you lost. I never knew what it was like to have sight and hearing, and it's just the effects him and my granny had on people's lives just seemed to be absolutely incredible.
I can see why you wanted to be an ambassador fighting blindness. Absolutely. With that in your family. Another extraordinary story is the story of the woman sitting beside me, Victoria Clare, who is a sculptor.
Yes.
And a very eminent one, and a very celebrated one. Victoria, you were born sighted, but a problem developed.
Indeed. The problem started happening probably, looking back now, when I was about 10. I stopped seeing the stars. I couldn't see them anymore. But didn't really think much of it because I was only a 10-year-old.
And were you saying to yourself, I can't see the stars, or did you assume
I just assumed that there were cloud and, that they wasn't out. And then it wasn't until my teens that I started to get much more clumsy at night, falling over and etc. And still, once again, really being a teenager, those elementary years, you don't really want to kind of think about things that are wrong with you. So I just thought everybody saw like that. No one could see very well at night. And it wasn't until I was 19 years old, after I passed my driving test, I'd never had a lesson at night. It was just pure coincidence. I got in my car to celebrate and soon realised I shouldn't be driving because I couldn't see. I then very promptly went to an ophthalmologist, and they diagnosed, after quite a lot of extensive tests, literally sat me down and said, you're going to go blind. My condition is retinitis pigmentosa. It is a inherited retinal dystrophy. For me, it is recessive, which means there is, as far as we know, nobody in the family before me that has it. So I now can obviously stop that chain.
So the recessive gene being hidden by the dominant gene,
yes,
but passed on to you. Two recessives from your parents gave rise to this.
To this, yeah.
Now, there are many careers that I suppose if you had RP, it would not particularly, might be a bit limiting, but you could still carry on.
Sure.
But your chosen path in life was very much a visual one. Explain.
It was. I was literally on a graphic design course when I was diagnosed at art college. graphic design being a very, very visual thing to actually follow. But prior to actually getting on the graphic design course, I fell in love with sculpture, which I think really there was somebody up above telling me, no, you're not going to be able to do such a visual job, so let me give you something that's more tactile. And that was before I found out about my vision. And it was just because I loved sculpture so much that I decided to follow that path. I then got onto a really prestigious course in Staffordshire University, where there was only actually 28 places in Europe, and I had an unconditional place. And then, like I say, I was diagnosed, and that was at the point of being 19, and my world just shattered. I didn't have any independent mobility living skills to go ahead and make a success of that sculpture course. So unfortunately, I had to walk away from it, which was very difficult.
So what happened between then, when you had to walk away, and now, where you are incredibly successful sculptor?
Thank you. Well, that was 25 years ago. As I say, it took me a couple of years to lick my wounds, get my head around what was actually happening to me. But I soon realised that, OK, I wasn't able to do the course, but it didn't mean I didn't have the skills. So I just literally started carving through therapeutic reasons to help me. And then it became very apparent that people were interested in my work. I started selling work in just local galleries, and then word of mouth became a big part of it. And then I started to get very regular commissions. And literally, I set myself up as a freelance artist, and the commissions just kept coming. I mean, I've had a career in teaching as well along the way, but the sculpture has always been a constant thing, and it's been a very much professional thing for me for the past 10 years.
Now, RP is progressive.
It is, yeah.
So at what point are you now? Do you have sight at all?
At the moment, I have roughly between 3 to 5 residual vision, 3 to 5% residual vision, which isn't very much. To put that in a little bit more understanding terms, for me, it's in my left eye, it's just hand movement. In my right eye, it's slightly better, so I get to see shapes and a little bit of colour. And everybody in the room at the moment, to me, is just a silhouette.
A silhouette.
Yeah, and nobody has a face, unfortunately.
We have massive NT logos here in black and white and red, which you might be able to see because they're so garish and lurid. but now, in terms of passing on your skills,
yes.
How difficult is it for the students initially to say how, or are they even aware when you're talking to them that you have this visual impairment?
Well, I stopped teaching about 6 years ago because I wanted to really go into exhibiting my work, because that's something I hadn't actually done up to that point. I'd had many, many commissions, but not actually exhibited. So for me, at this moment in time, I'm literally a full-time professional artist. But back when I was teaching children. So children are so much more acceptant anyway. And they didn't seem to really pick up on any kind of problem and understood everything that I was teaching. I was teaching it in a different way. Obviously, it needed to be a much more adaptive way for me. But they got just as much learning as everybody else that didn't have a visual impairment and that was teaching.
I would recommend people go online to have a look at your work.
Yes,
because it's sinuous and wonderful. It's beautiful.
Thank you. It's www.victoriaclaire.sculpture.com. So that's a bit of a mouthful. If you can Google Victoria Claire, you'll find it. Yes.
Yeah. What will your message be at the conference?
Well, I'm an ambassador for Retina UK. Retina UK is a charity for inherited diseases of the retina, and they also are researching and funding an awful lot of research as well. And through them, and also through my personal advocation, I really want to share my personal experience with acceptance. And by that I mean that, okay, yes, if you have a visual impairment, you do initially feel that you're going to not be able to do much with your life. And my message is, yes, you can do anything. I'm not just a professional artist. I'm a surfer. I'm a skateboarder. I'm learning to snowboard. I'm a musician. I play piano, guitar and sing. there is many things you can do in your life to live a full and engaging life as a visually impaired person.
And you're making us all feel terribly inadequate with that list of achievements.
Sorry for that.
Now, David, you're a consultant ophthalmologist at the Mater University Hospital. What's the idea of this conference? What messages are you trying to get across?
Well, thank you very much for having us in. But the real message, I suppose, is the message for fighting blindness, is that we continue to search for a cure. We look to empower our members and our patients, and we look to support those who are affected by vision impairment. Because these are two remarkable stories, Shane's grandfather and Victoria Clare herself. But for every person with a vision impairment who has that real inspirational story, there are 50 or 100 that really can't touch those heights or feel that they'll never get to those heights. So these stories and experiences that are remarkable, and I feel quite humble sitting here also, because I couldn't stand up on a surfboard or a skateboard to save my life. But it's also that the challenges of day to day, because you can only start to take on things like sculpture, surfing, and that if you've got every other aspect of your life sorted out. So the message for those other patients or people suffering with a vision impairment is that you can grab hold of that. There are supports out there. Fighting Blindness will look to help you. There are other agencies in the state that will look to help you. And we will look to put pressure on the government to provide more and more of those services. But it's really that cure, support and empowerment piece. So that's the message of Fighting Blindness. And tomorrow, which is our public engagement day, and really it's a unique event. We have guests from all over the world every year come to this, and they remark every time with the engagement from our members and the quality of the talks and the quality of the questions that they get in. So we encourage people to come. You'll learn an awful lot about your condition. You don't have to stand up. You don't need to be an absolute champion in X, Y, or Z. Come and maybe tell your story. And if you leave with an empowerment yourself to do a little bit more, the conference will have achieved.
Right. Now, David, how common is visual impairment?
Well, we estimate that in this country, 224,000 people have a vision impairment of some sort. Most of that is at the minor end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Those who've got a moderate vision impairment that does affect their day-to-day activities, roughly 50 to 55,000. That's per the last census. And we have between 12 and 14,000 people who are registered blind to the National Council of the Blind Register. So we have a significant number of people, and we've done work in the past on, without sounding cold, what the financial cost of carrying patients or service users with a blind vision impairment is, and that's really significant. So there's an incentive for our health service and our Department of Social Protection and Finance to work with people with a vision impairment, to empower them to get back into the workplace, for example, or to have fulfilled lives.
And for those who may be prey to, say, RP, as we know, an inherited condition which is progressive, I'm sure there's research going on to try and in some way reverse that or stop it in its tracks. But there are other conditions like glaucoma which can blind people but are absolutely preventable.
Absolutely preventable. We estimate worldwide 75% of all blindness is preventable. So there's no doubt our public health systems have to tackle those.
What about cataracts?
Cataract, glaucoma, macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy. So we have programs in place in this country, for example, around diabetic retinopathy, but we don't have active programs just yet. We have a plan, but we need a finance plan to tackle glaucoma, cataract and macular degeneration. And I'm glad you touched on the area of research in retinitis pigmentosa. It is a hotbed of research across the world. And I would say to anybody suffering with retinitis pigmentosa or macular dystrophies, don't lose heart. That work is ongoing. There'll be massive breakthroughs. If you follow the story of gene therapy, I saw it first at a conference about 20 years ago where they cured a mouse. 4 years later, they cured the dog. 7 years after that, the first human trials were published. And then last year and this year in the US and UK and Europe, respectively, they licensed the first gene therapy drug to treat blindness due to an inherited retinal degeneration globally. So there is progress being made. It can never seem fast enough for those affected, but it is happening. And if you come to Retina tomorrow, you'll find out a bit more.
Well, thank you very much to Professor David Keegan, consultant ophthalmologist at the Mater University Hospital and a member of that Retina 2018 organising committee, to sculptor Victoria Clare and to Shane Byrne, Fighting Blindness Ambassador. Thank you all very much for joining us. And Meet the Experts conference for people affected by sight loss is happening tomorrow at the Radisson Blu Hotel on Golden Lane in Dublin, just a stone's throw from where we are. If you want to attend, just register at retina.ie. IE.